Hello, we are Group 3 presenting the Hydro 1 case discussion. My name is Cliff Carpenter. I will be presenting Section A. Soraya Coburn will be presenting Section B. Cameron Morrison has done the slides for Section C and Section D, and I will be doing the voiceovers for Section C and Section D as well. To start, Section A asks, what are Hydro One's previous and current business positions? Hydroelectric Power Commission of Ontario was formed in 1906 to supply municipal utilities with electricity by privately held companies operating at Niagara Falls. In 1998, the Energy Competition Act caused Hydroelectric Power Commission to split into two separate companies, Ontario Power Generation that made the energy and Hydro One that distributed the energy. Now, Ontario Power Generation generates and sells over 70% of Ontario's electricity through their multiple energy facilities, which include hydroelectric, fossil fuel, wind stations, and nuclear power plants. Hydro One is the arm that serves the customers and handles more of the business side of things, including billing and collecting, repair and maintenance, and expansion of power line infrastructure. As stated in the case, the business of Hydro One today is to deliver electricity safely and reliably to 92 municipal utilities, 114 large industrial customers, and 1.3 million households in the province of Ontario. In 2002, however, the government wanted Hydro One to go public, but before the IPO could go through, Hydro One faced media and political issues around the private sector level salaries of the management team, which eventually led to the board resignation, CEO replacement by internal candidate Laura Formusa, and ultimately cancellation of the IPO. On top of these issues, in 2002, unusually hot weather increased energy costs to consumers, and the Ontario Energy Board mandated lower distribution rates, causing Hydro One to launch an efficiency and cost-cutting program. This program actually dismissed 140 staff members and caused a hiring freeze, but improved their financial profile overall. In 2005, however, 800 professional employees went on an 18-week strike to protest a proposed decrease of benefits to new employees and their union arising from cost-cutting measures. Continuing on Section A, Question 1, a nearing election contained much discussion over energy savings and environmental conservation as the Ontario government put pressure on Formusa and Hydro One to lead the way despite the potential negative impact on Hydro One's revenues and earnings. Also, as stated in the case, Hydro One had to manage a complex web of conflicting interests, the multiple agendas of government ministers, regulators, consumers, environmental groups, and capital market debt holders who had recently subscribed to the company's 1 billion Canadian dollar bond issue, which was not guaranteed by the province. Although there was pressure for conservation, a heat wave hit Ontario that summer, causing an increase in demand, which led to Hydro One introducing power cost monitors to consumers to monitor their energy use in real time, and actually showed an 8% reduction of energy consumption in their pilot study. Now, this customer-focused strategy greatly increased customer satisfaction ratings. Moving on, part 2 of Section A asks, what is Hydro One's strategy? What are its objectives, scope of operations, and its advantages? As stated in the case, Formusa endorsed the vision and a strategic plan to make Hydro One the best transmission and distribution business in North America. It would achieve this vision by having the best safety record in the world, top quartile transmission and distribution reliability, 90% customer satisfaction across all segments, top quartile employee productivity, operating efficiency, and an A credit rating. Formusa also intended to reach out and negotiate a long-term deal with the unions. On top of this mission statement presented by Formusa, there really needed to be functional strategies to meet this statement. Most importantly, identifying and strategizing around the company's risks. Such a strategy was really to determine the risks of the company so that the company's resources could be allocated to the most essential investments and operations to mitigate as much and as many risks as possible, reduce costs as much as possible, and create the greatest return for the firm. Hydro One would use the strategic decision making to allow the company to become a lot more comfortable with taking risks and to help change the behavior and way of thinking about risks. Now, although previously stated in slide 1, Hydro One's scope of operations was really to deliver electricity safely and reliably to 92 municipal utilities, 114 large industrial customers, and 1.3 million households in the province of Ontario. This also includes employees who are out in the field building and fixing lines, employees working in all of the different energy producing facilities, people in the control center monitoring all of the lines and taking calls from customers, as well as responding to those calls and fixing outages. Now, the strategy of the Enterprise Risk Management Program was really to break down divisional silos, prevent managers from becoming too risk averse, and to create a way to allocate resources to the areas most in need to reduce costs and be of most value to the firm. By allocating resources, this largely meant spending money where it was needed most. According to Gregory Van Dusen, Director, Asset Manager, and Business Integration Leader at Hydro One, he stated that the idea was to spend money to take Hydro One out of the red zone on the heat map and move down to some reasonable level of residual risk after the money was spent. He says, spend more money, you reduce the risks. The ERM strategy was conducted in 3 phases. The first phase was risk workshops and the Delphi method. Now, these risk workshops were conducted to achieve approved understanding of all the risks in the company, drive action, and create a simulation for the type of thinking that the risk team wanted to encourage among management decision makers. Employees from all areas were able to come together, even meet for the first time, voice and listen to each other's views on the risks, what to do about them, and leave with a better understanding on how to approach their jobs. Phase 2 was reviewing the corporate risk profile. Now, this phase helped create a better balance between risk and return by allocating resources to prioritized investment project proposals based on the risks identified. Hydro One was able to evaluate what risks they face, the severity and importance of those risks, and really where their resources should be allocated to generate the greatest return from those risks. Phase 3 was the risk-based investment appraisal and planning. Now, during Phase 3, risk-based investment and appraisal planning, the Chief Risk Officer conducted a series of one-to-one interviews twice a year with senior managers to review the corporate risk profile. This really helped to break down divisional silos of the company even more by analyzing the set of risks of each senior manager's areas and strategizing around them all together. Hydro One had some advantages. Some of these advantages included providing electricity for 70% of Ontario, which topped the market, a unique culture of diverse employees that helped run Hydro One with ease, including a newly internally hired CEO, Laura Formusa, and an enterprise risk management program that has proven to be successful, along with a stellar risk management team that has made it so successful. The next question asked, what threats does Hydro One currently face? Now, looking at the corporate risk profile trends table, we can see that the main threats or risks Hydro One currently faces were from regulatory market risk, strategic risk, and operational risks. Now, for regulatory and market risks, some examples of those risks include regulatory uncertainty, customer expectations and relationships, and commodity price volatility. Now, strategic risks included government policy uncertainty, investor expectations, and growth. Government policy uncertainty was really a big threat. It stated in the case that there were times when the company was spending money for projects while waiting on government policy changes and not knowing the outcomes that could potentially cause the money they just spent to be wasted if Hydro One was not in compliance with the new policies. Some of the operational risks included asset condition, safety, and environmental contamination. On top of these, Hydro One also faced issues of land ownership from Aboriginals when expanding their lines, public reputation, and the most extreme being weather, causing potential havoc for the company and threatening the safety of its employees. Moving on, the next question asked, how are Hydro One's strategy and the threats it faces related? Through its ERM program, Hydro One clearly aligned their strategy to combat the threats that it faced, being conducted very thoughtfully and thoroughly. Some of the examples include, for regulatory uncertainty, they allocated money as best they could until new regulations were set in place, in which they adjusted resources at that time. Customer expectations were being met through risk mitigation and the introduction of the smart meter. On top of this, asset condition, safety, and environmental contamination were high risks that were decided by the company through the risk workshops, in which resources were allocated to the most dire projects in need of risk mitigation. Because of this awesome enterprise risk management program that they introduced, costs were greatly cut, and there was a much better balance of risk and return. Along with this, the workshops really caused divisional silos to be broken down, and managers were not as nearly risk averse because they were not aware, or because they became more aware of all the risks, really the severity, importance of each risk, and where, when, and why resources needed to be allocated to certain risks.
The Enterprise Risk Management Program process for Hydro One. So before the ERM program, Hydro One had a lot of reputational risks, financial risks, safety risks, and strategic risks, and this all happened because of the blackout event that occurred years ago. Employees lacked risk factors of the company. They weren't able to describe what the company's risks were to their board of directors. They lacked on making trade-offs and selections between projects. They weren't really sure on how to distinguish them. There was really no explanation of its key objectives. There were no opportunities for peer-to-peer conversations about risk tolerance and risk appetite. In fact, employees would fight with each other due to limited resources. There was no real methodology to the importance of the company. The CEO had a lot to do with this. There was little strategic planning. And like I said, the CEO had a lot of negative acts in its business decision making. Ever since ERM program came in place, Hydro One's employees are more knowledgeable about controls of risk. They know the risk that the company's facing. They know how to place the risk. So yeah, they know how to identify, measure, manage risk, and possibly mitigate risk. Risk placing and knowing strategic objectives was one of the good things that came from the workshops that the employees and senior management were involved in. ERM created a framework where it was integrated within the company, making it a culture to follow. It made them prioritize the risks that they wanted to take into effect, understand how much of it they needed, and inclusively how to mitigate those risks if they weren't good for the company. So strategic planning helped them with annual updates, and ERM continued to add value to the company. Like I said, it created 3-phase risk management program. The program was initiated to start strategic planning to see which risks will allow for them to be successful and which should be mitigated. As we all know, risks come in different shapes and sizes. Electricity regulators would change all the time for Hydro One, environmental changes, and that's why they would prioritize their risk, and that's when they came up with the heat maps. They would sit in the workshops and they would make a list of risk exposures, and they would see the probability and severity of certain risks. Some risks gain opportunities in exploding them because they had already been exposed to them before, so they had an idea of how to identify, measure it, and manage it. Some they did keep, others they did mitigate. With strategic decision making, all the employees for the most part became more comfortable with taking risks than it ever did in years before. Like I said, risks are both upside and downside. Like I said, some are opportunities for the business. They could have larger returns. So if you don't have risk, you don't get money. The more you risk, the higher rate of return you can get. So stating your mind in the workshops, the employees were getting familiar with the idea, they were trusting each other more, and that was for the betterment of the company as well as employees. And once they trusted each other, they were able to move on to the next steps. And that was part of the strategic planning that they came in with the ERM program. Electric utilities are a notorious risk-averse culture. In fact, all executives are either engineers or accountants. They have a strong certainty of things and are very comfortable with risks. Some senior management, for the most part, believe that if you take risks, there is potentially a higher rate of return. Your revenues can increase, which is what every business person wants, the wealth of the stockholders of the company. ERM is a better way to think of risk exposure the company bears, and sustaining and keeping enterprise risk management program must be embedded as a culture within the company for it to be successful. Internally integrated and applied by every employee is a very useful tool for project success. So ERM program for Hydro One has been looked at as more of a culture than as a program, and that's why it continues to be successful and it has become very effective.
Moving on to section C, the first question asks, what are the similarities between each firm's approach to these challenges and what are the differences? We're going to start with the similarities. First, both companies involved engineers. So both companies involved expertise from their fields when involving the risk management process and the enterprise risk management programs. Another similarity is educating and enlightening upper decision makers. So the risk management team from both companies would really sit down with the upper decision makers and educate them on risk management and enlighten them on some of the decisions that they could make and some of the risks that they might bring to the table. Another similarity is the open communication that was involved in both companies. Both companies would involve employees from all over the company to break down divisional silos and open up the communication lines. Both companies would also challenge ideas. So both companies had a risk management team that would really challenge and question everything that the decision makers or even the employees from each company were bringing to the table. Another similarity is collaborating among different functions. As I said, they both companies brought employees from all different functions of the company to really break down those divisional silos and make sure that the communication lines were open. And both companies also used external consulting. So they both brought in experts that, or I guess people that were outside of the expertise of each company that had an outside perspective to question and challenge the ideas being presented at these risk meetings. Some of the differences include JPL is project oriented while Hydro One is thinking about the long run. Really, JPL's case study was just based on the single project that they were working on, as opposed to Hydro One that was focused on the long run and mitigating all the risks that were involved with the company moving forward. Another difference is the different interests in investors and upper management that lead to different challenges. So essentially, different interests in investors and upper management for both companies are going to lead to different challenges. So each company had different challenges that they were faced with, and then they also had different investors and different upper management that were presenting different challenges that would also lead to different challenges later on. Moving on to question 2. So question 2 asks, how did the ERM programs at JPL and Hydro One change their company's cultures and risk awareness? How did they change the way decisions were made? Hydro One's approach to risk management is developing a culture around it from the bottom up and the top down. This has also led to better communication. As said previously, it really helped to break down divisional silos. It helped to bring risks that were bothering all functions of the company to the top. It allowed for better communication throughout the company and really just developed a better culture. Same with JPL, what it did was it allowed for risks to be more clear. It allowed for the highest risks to come out of the woodworks and really not so much worry about the smaller risks or to generalize risks. It also helped to cut costs immensely in both companies. Also, the workshops allowed for employees at Hydro One to start gaining a risk mindset while communicating that information to a manager, and then the manager would analyze it and decide whether or not to take it farther or handle it. Also, the workshop slimmed down 60 to 70 risks to 8 to 10 important risks. It incorporated 30 to 40 executives. It got lower level employees involved, both laterally and horizontally, and ultimately brought the silos together. As said previously, the workshops at Hydro One really did break down the divisional silos and really helped develop a better culture at Hydro One. As stated in the case, before the risk management program, there was a lot of fights over the resources to mitigate risks. The workshops really helped to alleviate those fights and to make sure that resources were being allocated to the correct places. Same with JPL, there was no idea of which risks were more important than others. It was kind of a fiasco of where to allocate resources and make sure costs were at the lowest they could possibly be. So the risk management really helped to alleviate all those concerns. Question 3 asks, closely related to question 2, how did Hydro One's ERM program encourage the flow of information through the firm? In particular, how did John Fraser encourage information flow? Was he an authentic manager, as defined in the JPL case study instructions? As Professor Daly said, we really didn't need to answer the question of was he an authentic manager, but nonetheless, as far as Hydro One's ERM program encouraging the flow of information, absolutely did. What it did was it really just broke down divisional silos, again, by incorporating employees from all over the company. Employees were encouraged to offer their thoughts on the risks, offer their knowledge, offer their assessments of the risks, in which were discussed greatly in the risk meetings. Which also incorporates John Fraser. John Fraser was the one that encouraged the flow of information and allowed for employees from all over the company to give their ideas and assessments on the risks involved at the company. Moving on to question 4, it says, now consider Gentry Lee and John Fraser. What are the similarities and differences in their organizational roles and approaches? John Fraser versus Gentry Lee. Gentry Lee was a risk manager and implemented a program and monitored it, while John Fraser is a risk manager and also an internal auditor. Some similarities include upper management reporting functions, decision-making abilities, using challenging ideas and open communication, and faced risks and did not run from it. Some of the differences are that JPL is more project-based and in the moment, while Hydro One is looking at sustainability and growth for the long term of their company. John Fraser was also able to include the audit function and separate the discussions while bringing it all together for more results. So another difference is they have different stakeholders for their companies. Finally, question. Moving on to section D, the big picture. The question asks, after the recent financial crisis, initiating a risk management program, especially an ERM program, became virtually mandatory. However, as the crisis receded and the recovery stalled, stakeholders and top management looked for expenses to trim. As a result, risk officers have found it increasingly necessary to justify their programs in terms of hard currency. So just one way to measure the value created in dollars by Hydro One's ERM program. The second question asks, in general, what made Hydro One's ERM program so successful? So the big picture, the effectiveness from this program comes from many areas. Also developing risk mindsets among all employees and departments, checks and balances. Focusing on key risks and allocating the proper resources to those risks. An analysis of risk through science and through using the Delphi voting method and collaboration among departments and levels of employment. Taking the key risks and valuing them based off of severity and likelihood, and then aggregating those values could show investors the value of this program. Also, it involved 30 to 40 executives for twice a year report and established monitoring and ownership. Finally, bringing the engineers and the investment planning together allowed for better investment strategies and decisions by incorporating risk into the analysis. When it comes to the ERM program, nothing is perfect, nor is there a given standard of implementation. You must not just understand your industry, company, and plans, but you must align it all with a goal and tailor it to your model and application.